Section 1, Logging into DEBS and the Dashboard Overview. So when you are first signing into DEBS, you will go to https://secure.in.gov/apps/FSSA/voucher, which is this URL above without the test or UAT section. So the actual website will look like the following. This URL right here. But for the training video purposes, I'll be using our test DEBS environment, so the URL does look slightly different. The first thing you will do is click the green sign in button on the screen and log in with your two-step verification system, username and passcode. The Restricted Access Indiana portal for the two-step verification is simply put to protect patient information from the state level. So input your username and password, and then we'll also ask for you to do the two-step process. I'll choose to text a code. And once you receive your verification code, go ahead and input it into the system and click enter. The DEBS system looks very similar to this test environment. The difference in the test environment is that there is a big UAT button at the top. This can be ignored for the training video as it will not appear on the actual DEBS site. So when you first log into DEBS, it may default you directly to the facility that you were assigned under when your username and passcode were first created. However, if you're available to multiple facilities in the DEBS system, you may be booted to a facility search screen first when you log in. If so, just choose the exact facility that you'd like to review for the day. For this training video, I'll be using the Fresh MERS team as an example. So when you log into DEBS, if you are defaulted directly to your facility, this is more so what your dashboard page will look like. So at the top here, about to be highlighted, is the name of your facility. Right here is where you can find your client active claims. No claims are currently found for this facility in the test environment. Your facility information is on the right side of the screen here, with the name, the organization that your facility is under, your vendor ID, and then the physical address for your facility, as well as a mailing address if it's different from the facility address. Now this section here, the table that is gray, this is the GPRA intake queue for your facility. So it will say the name of the individual in asterisks on the left, but when you hover over, it will tell you the first initial and last name of that GPRA client. It will also list their DEBS ID, their GPRA ID, as well as the form that is due for them, whether it be their intake GPRA, follow-up, or discharge, the due date for their GPRA, the form status on whether or not it's overdue or due, and the days remaining for how long it has been overdue or how long it has been due. And at the bottom right of your facility page is your fund. So these are the funds that your facility is currently able to charge. On the left side of the screen for DEBS, there is the quick access dashboard. So there is the dashboard to get to the beginning of DEBS again, or to your home screen. There is your profile, where you can select to see your exact username and password and facility access information. Under search, there's facilities, which is where we're at right now. There's also the clients search function. When you're on this screen, you can either create a new client using the blue button up here, or you can type in any of the information for a specific client in these search boxes to bring up the exact client that you'd like to view that day. The bottom will also show some of your more recent clients if you already have some in the system. Again, to the left is another claims section. So you can search any of the claims that your facility has made in the DEB system if you'd need to check anything about their current status. It also shows the quick view at the bottom for any more recent claims and will show you the question status on all of your specific claims and what fund they're getting pulled from, their effective dates, their current status, and then again the client's DEBS ID as well as the claim ID. If your facility has any invoices in the DEB system, you can also see that underneath the search section of the quick access dashboard on the left. There are currently no invoices for the specific facility that I am looking at, but if you are wanting to look at your facility's invoices, go ahead and type in your invoice number, the invoice ID, the fund specifically that has been charged, or the claim ID and click search to look them up below. There is also the report section on the left-hand side. This can be ignored for any of the GIPRA collecting agencies. Unfortunately, the GIPRA forms report section is not currently up to date or accurate in the information that it reports. However, we are hoping at DMHA that in the future that DEBS can be updated to show an accurate report. If your facility is looking for any accurate GIPRA information, please contact the SOAR team, the data coordinator Joanne Keys, or the grants assistant Laura Scherbaum directly for that information. Underneath admin on the left-hand side is also the option for user management. If you want to look at the exact users underneath your facility, you can search them by name or their email address. If you would like to add a new user to your facility, please contact our grants assistant Laura Scherbaum directly with that individual's name as well as their email address, and we can get them added into our system. Also in the left-hand column is resources. So one of the resources listed is the 42 CFR form. If you need that information downloaded, when you click that link, it will automatically download it as long as you don't have pop-ups blocked in your browser. The 42 CFR form is just a data disclosure form that must be signed by the patient and on file at your agency before they complete the GIPRA. Training resources is the next section from the DEBS link. So that will take you directly to FSSA's DEBS resources page, where you can find and access the DEBS business rules for claim submissions, as well as some agency agreement and vendor enrollment information if your agency is still in the process of getting enrolled into DEBS entirely, as well as the attestation SOAR DEBS file for patients that have to sign before completing the DEBS, that they attest that they understand that they are going to be receiving SOAR funds for the services they'll get through your agency, and that they have been offered all 3 forms of medication-assisted treatment. Finally, at the bottom of the left-hand column for resources is the help desk. If you do experience any issues with DEBS, we do ask that instead of first using this help desk link, that instead you contact the data coordinator and grants assistant, again, Joanne Keys and Laura Scherbaum at DMHA directly with any issues that you're experiencing, and they can submit the IT ticket for you. However, the resource is still available there in the left-hand column if you choose to access it. And that is the DEBS overview for logging into the system and the dashboard overview. This is section 2, an overview of the DEBS system on how to add a new client to the DEBS system. So right now I am logged into our test environment for DEBS, so the site may look slightly different from the actual DEBS test site, but for the majority of this web page, it will look very similar to the actual DEBS site. One of the main differences is that our test site has this UAT orange button at the top, and that is not visible on the actual DEBS website. Now, when I log into our DEBS website, the first thing that I'm going to see is my dashboard, and I am currently logged in under my facility Fresh MERS team, as it says in the top left. If I'm going into my facility and into the DEBS system to create a new client, I'm going to go to the left-hand column and click Clients. From here, I will go to the top right of the screen to this blue button and click Create Client. There are three options that pop up when I first go in to create a new client. The first is to select my organization. So I can click this text box and receive two drop-down options. I'm going to choose Fresh Treatment Inc. for this example. You can also manually type in the organization that your facility is under. Second is to select your facility. So again, you can manually type in your facility's name or just click the text box and select the correct drop-down option. I'm going to choose Fresh MERS Team for this example. And then select a fund. The fund should be the current SOAR grant year that the client is being included or added under. So right now we are in SOAR 3. So for this example, I'm going to choose the fund Marks Demo SOAR 3 GIPRA Collection Fund. And once the top three sections are completed, then the Create New Client for your organization or Fresh Treatment Inc. will pop up below. First, note that any of the questions at the bottom that have a red triangle with an exclamation point next to it, like GIPRA ID, mean that these are required questions that must be filled out before you can submit the Create Client button at the bottom right. You can notice right now that it is grayed out because all of the required questions have not been filled out yet. So for the first question, GIPRA ID, you do not need to manually input the GIPRA ID. Instead, click the underlined Generate GIPRA ID below that text box to create the GIPRA ID for the client. Internal ID to the right. This is an internal identifier that your practice or facility may use, and this is optional to input into the DEBS system. It is most beneficial if you would like to search a client by their internal ID in the DEBS system. If so, include the internal ID here. I'm going to put the example of MERS 0098 for this internal ID. For first initial, this is the first initial for your client. I'm going to put M as an example. And for last name, this is the last name of your client. So I'm going to put MERS as the example last name. For last four Social Security number, Social Security numbers are optional for the SOAR clients added to DEBS. If your agency does not currently collect Social Security numbers, that is okay. You can skip over this text box. However, if your agency does collect Social Security numbers and you'd like to disclose it into the DEBS system to later search or track that client, include that information here. For an example, I'm just going to put this random Social Security 4-digit number. For date of birth, this is a required question. As an example date of birth, I'm going to put June 11th, 1989. Now, the bottom two checkboxes are patient release information. The first one is 42 CFR compliant release of information form. So checking this box verifies that the client has signed this CFR form and that a paper copy is also included in the client's chart, whether it be their physical chart or in their electronic chart. Your agency must have this filed and on site for as long as you're receiving SOAR funds and or have that client in your services. The 42 CFR as an overview is a data release document, pretty much asserting that the client is okay with their information being shared into our DEBS system for the state to review, as well as into SAMHSA's federal system, where their data is anonymous, but they are okay with that disclosure. If your client signed the form, go ahead and check that box. For the client eligibility attestation, this is asserting that in order for the client to utilize funding under the DMHA electronic billing system, that your agency attests that the organization understands and will comply with any and all documentation requirements and eligibility standards set forth by the fund being used. So this means that the client understands that their services are going to be billed underneath the SOAR grant through DEBS, and that they should have access and can access all 3 medication-assisted treatment types at your facility. In addition, this also means that the client asserts that there is no other billing fund that will be utilized for the services that they'll receive through the SOAR grant. If these are both true, go ahead and select both checkboxes, and then the Create Client button does turn blue, so I can select it. You'll get a pop-up to confirm the client information. Always double check this information, as it is very easy to do a typo, and this information is a bit harder to correct after it's been submitted into the system. So if all of this information is correct, as I double check it and hover over, the date of birth may not have been accepted, but we'll see. I'm going to click Confirm Client Information. Success. The green bar at the bottom says that I have created a new client in the system. So typically what happens is that you are then booted to the client's dashboard page. So right now I can see that this is the client that I created at the top. I can hover over to see their first initial and last name. All of their information is here as well, with their DEBS ID, their GIPRA ID, and their internal ID. And any personal information that has asterisks, we can just hover right over to see the actual response. Their claims, once some have been submitted, will be here in the system. Their active claims will be here as well, those that have not been approved yet. And then any client documents can get dragged and dropped here as well. If I want to see this client's GIPRA forms, I can go right here at the top, and I can create an encounter. And once that is completed, then I can upload GIPRAs into the system and view them on this page. If you'd like to see how to input a GIPRA into the system, please go to section 3 of the training videos. If I want to navigate anywhere else for this specific client, I go to the top right where it says Client Dashboard and hit that drop down. And notice that I can go directly to their Client Dashboard overview where we were just at, or to upload documents if they're in treatment and need documents uploaded to support the claim request, and to view their claim history directly. Now, if I am not on the client dashboard, but I'd like to see this client, I can also just go to Clients in the left-hand column, and I can search by the DEBS ID I just copied. And click Search, and this is the client I just created in the system, and I can click here as well to get right back to their dashboard page. And that is section 2, overviewing how to add a new client into the DEBS system. This is section 3, adding a new GIPRA to the DEBS training series. First, what you want to do is log into DEBS and get onto your own dashboard page. It may look similar to this if you have an organization with multiple facilities. So from your dashboard page or from your facility page, where you first want to go is into the left-hand column for clients. And from here, you want to search for the client to get onto their dashboard page. So this is the client that I'd like to input a GIPRA for today. So I'll select them. And then I'm taking to their client dashboard page. If you've just inputted the client's information, it'll automatically bump you to your client's dashboard page once all of that information is submitted and confirmed. So once you're here, you want to go to the top right where it says View GIPRA Forms. This button also sometimes says Select Action. Regardless of what it says, this is where you want to go to select the drop-down and click View GIPRA Forms. Now, once we're here, we need to start an encounter in order to get the options to input the intake, the follow-up, and the discharge GIPRAs for the client. So we start out with filling in these 3 questions. First, your organization name. I'm going to use Fresh Treatment Inc. as an example. And then I'm going to input the intake interview date, and I'll list it as yesterday, so 6/20/2024. And then for billing type, I'm also going to click into this text box to see my options. And I want to select the current state opioid response or SOAR grant year. And right now it's currently SOAR 3. Now, once all of that information is inputted, you click the Create Encounter button. Once the page loads, now you'll see all of the options to input the intake GIPRA, the follow-up GIPRA, the administrative follow-up, the discharge GIPRA, or the administrative discharge GIPRA. Now for GIPRA input, you always want to start with the intake in order to get the client into services and to begin their coverage under grant funding. For the discharge and follow-up GIPRAs, just of note is that the discharge can happen before the follow-up. And regardless of whether or not the client is discharged from the program, once you've completed an intake with a client, a follow-up is necessary. So to begin with an intake GIPRA, we're first going to select our interview facility. I'm going to choose the Fresh Treatment Center just as an example. And once you've selected your facility, you can click Create Intake. Once you're on this page and your GIPRA has loaded, it looks very similar to the paper GIPRA form, but in a much more user-friendly format. So it first takes you to the record management page, and you can see at the very top where it says GIPRA forms in draft status will be deleted after 90 days of inactivity. So if you have not opened this GIPRA and it's still in draft status and has not been fully submitted and accepted into the SPARS system by 90 days, then it will be deleted from devs and you will need to start over. Now for the headings below that blue bar, each heading corresponds to the headings within the GIPRA paper interview document. You can click between any of the headings to move throughout the form. We'll go back to starting at A with record management. The red numbers next to each heading indicates the number of required questions that still need a response in order to fully submit this form. Now for the record management section specifically, client ID and contract grant ID are grayed out, and that information is auto inputted for you and cannot be edited. For the interview date, that information is also auto generated for you already, but always double check your interview date is correct. For client description by grant type, the little red triangle with an exclamation point next to the question indicates that this is a required question that needs a response in order to submit the form. So for this question, you can always mark treatment grant client. And then for interview type, this information is also auto-generated for you and you cannot change it to another option, but always double check that the interview type is the correct one that you need to input. You can also notice that once I selected the treatment grant client for a client grant or client description by grant type, that the one next to the record management section disappeared. So that means that I've answered all of the required questions in this section. What I can do now is save the section. It turns yellow, it's loading, and then if it's successful at the bottom of the screen, there'll be a green bar that pops up saying success. If it was unsuccessful in saving, it'll pop up red at the bottom and say unsuccessful. If that ever happens to you, please refresh the page. Typically, it is just an internet connection issue and it just lags for a moment. Now, even if you don't save this section, if you do click the next button to move to Section A, Record Management Demographics, we can see that the last section we were in is still yellow for saving and it's loading currently. And it'll also tell me again at the bottom of the page whether or not that save was successful or unsuccessful. This is super helpful for when you're inputting GIPRAs on your own. If you have any other priority events that come up during your day, you are more than welcome to exit out of your browser and you can always come back to complete your GIPRA later on. For record management demographics, it looks like we have 10 required questions in this section. First is confirming the client's birth month and year. Always double check this information, even though it is auto input for you. It should match the date of birth information already set up when you created the client. What do you consider yourself to be is asking for the client's gender. So this is a required question. If the client responds with a response you are not familiar with or an other option than what is listed here, you can click Other. and then the specified text box will pop up. This is a type of response that is not exactly similar to the paper GIPRA form, meaning that in the paper GIPRA form, the specified text box is always available. In the DEB site, to get that specific specified text box to pop up, you need to respond in a specific way first to the question. So if you know that you've completed a paper GIPRA with the client and you are now trying to input it into DEBS and you see that the options are not available on the DEB site, ensure that you clicked the correct first response in order to get the follow-up response boxes and options to pop up as well in DEBS. For this client, though, I am just going to select male for the purpose of this example. What we can also notice on this question specifically before we move on is that for any radio dial options, meaning that there's a circle next to the answer choices, there is only one response that you are able to give, not multiple. However, if we skip down to the race question in the GIPRA, it is a checkbox option, meaning that I can select multiple and it will typically tell you for these question types that you can indicate more than one. For this question, are you Hispanic, Latino, and or of Spanish origin? If you click yes, then the option to respond what ethnic group they consider themselves to be will pop up. And again, if you click other, then the specified text box will pop up. For any of these questions, the client can respond with refused to the question. Please refer to the GIPRA paper form and to the bracketed information in the DEB site for the GIPRA to see exact instructions on whether or not or how response options should be provided to the client. For the majority of cases, we do ask that the answer choices not be provided to the client unless they have a lot of difficulty coming up with what the question means and potential answers to the question. This is just because we don't want the GIPRA interview to come off as misleading for any clients or as if we're trying to get them to respond in a specific way. Moving on through the GIPRA, another question is, do you speak a language other than English at home? If you do mark yes, then you receive the pop-up for what language. If it's a language other than Spanish, you'll select other and then specify in the text box. For this example, we'll just mark Spanish. For sexual orientation, the client can respond with multiple types of responses. And for this instance, we'll just put straight and bisexual. For your relationship status or the client's relationship status, this is a single option, and we'll select married for this example. For currently pregnant, this is a question that if the client is male, always select no. From the DEB site, once you're actually able to submit this form, if you do have a client that is male and you select yes for currently pregnant, when the system tries to process the GIPRA overnight, even though you were able to submit the form, that does not mean that all of the answer choices make sense to the system. So this is what would be considered an error within the system, and it would not process fully overnight. In this case, you would then receive an email the next morning with an error message asking you to go back into this GIPRA form and to change the response to the question for what makes sense to the system. If you have any questions about GIPRA errors or ever receive an error message that you don't know exactly how to address, please reach out to the SOAR team and we'll help you through the error message and get your GIPRA form approved. For the question, do you have any children? If the client responds yes, it'll then ask how many children under the age of 18 that they have. We'll input 2 for this example. And are any of their children who are under the age of 18 living with someone else due to court intervention? If you do select yes, then it'll ask how many children have been removed from the client's care. If you select 1 for this example, it'll then also ask how many have been reunited who have been previously removed from their care. And then the exact number if they have been reunited. For the question, have you ever served in the armed forces, in the reserves, in the National Guard, or in the uniformed services? If they did serve, it will ask you to respond with yes, and then exactly what branch type. So just ensure that if your client does say yes, that you're responding with the correct branch of the military. For how long does it take you on average to travel to the location where you receive services provided by this grant? We are asking for just one-way travel to their services. And then we'll hit next to go to the next section. I'll go back. One other thing I did not mention is that for distance to services, it is one-way travel, but if services for any client is for an incarcerated client or for a home-based service, input that time as how long it takes the provider to travel to the client, since the client is not traveling to services. For Section B, substance use, this is really the meat of the GIPRA, so it's just a very hefty, large section, and once you complete it, you're really almost done with the GIPRA itself. So first is listing the number of substances that the client reports having used in the last 30 days up until the interview date. So this is not since the beginning of the month, it is in the past 30 days. So if we're saying that the client's intake occurred yesterday on 6/20/2024, we're asking in the last 30 days. So since May 20th of 2024, have any of these substances been used? And if so, how many days? And then the route of that substance. The client can refuse to respond to any of the questions in this section if they feel uncomfortable or just don't want to disclose their substance use for any reason. If so, you just mark refused at the top, and then the following questions all disappear. However, if the client does respond with any alcohol or other substance use in the last 30 days, you'll respond to the question with the number of days exactly, and then you'll receive the option for the type of route that the substance was used. If you respond to any of the questions with 0 and accidentally or intentionally type 00, the system will accept that as a actual response to a more than 0 number of days that the substance was used and will then require a route option. If this happens, just go back in and delete the second 0 and just leave it as 1, and then you'll be able to move on to the other questions without any difficulties. For the rest of these substances, I'm just going to input 0 for this example case. Following the substance use number days section, it'll then ask the types of treatment services that the client may have received in the last 30 days for different types of substance groups. So the first one, if you've been diagnosed with an alcohol use disorder, which FDA-approved medication did you receive for the treatment of this alcohol use disorder in the past 30 days? The client can report multiple different types of medication types or services, and if you select any of these types, it'll then ask exactly how many days the client received those services in the last 30 days. Also, the client can report not having a diagnosis for any of these questions. So note again that it says, have you been diagnosed with an alcohol use disorder? We do not need formal medical records saying that the client has had or been diagnosed with a specific disorder. This is the client self-reporting whether or not they have been diagnosed. If the client received any type of medication or treatment that is not FDA approved, then select that option as well. And also the client can still respond or refuse to respond to any of these questions. And if so, you just select refused in order to gray out the other options and to move on to the next. If you ever accidentally click the refuse button, just unclick it in order to respond with the correct response from the client. And just also of note, for SOAR grant funds, there must be some type of opioid use disorder or stimulant use disorder that the client self-reports at some point in their life, but they may not have received treatment in the last 30 days. If so, then you'll just respond with did not receive any FDA-approved medication or service for the diagnosed disorder. For this client, we're just going to select methadone and 30 days, contingency management for 7 days as an example, and then refused. The next question is, in the past 30 days, did you experience an overdose or take too much of a substance that resulted in needing supervision or medical attention? If the client responds yes, click that, and then respond with the number or the type of intervention that the client received following that overdose. Multiple can be selected. Next is not including this current episode. How many times in your life have you been treated at an inpatient or outpatient facility for a substance use disorder? If multiple times are selected, it will then have the pop-up of approximately when was the last time you received inpatient or outpatient treatment for a substance use disorder. And then when it looks like you've come to the end, the final question on this page is, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health illness by a healthcare professional? This is very common for this client population. So if you select yes or the client responds yes, you then have this pop-up of multiple mental health disorders and mental health illnesses that the client can self-report having ever been diagnosed with. So click all that apply for the client or the ones that they responded with. This information is also self-reported, so they don't have to list all of the ones or have it match their actual medical health record or anything from a doctor. If the client is having difficulty thinking of potential substances or they seem foggy-headed at all during the interview, you can just start listing some of the mental health illnesses as well to help jog their memory. But again, no need to list all of the different mental health disorders if the client already knows exactly how to respond to the question. For planned services, the first question is, was the client screened by your program using an evidence-based tool or set of questions for co-occurring mental health and or substance use disorders? This is not a requirement for any programs that receive SOAR funding, so it is okay to click no if your agency does not do a co-occurring screener. However, if your agency does, select yes, and then we'll ask two pop-up follow-up questions of if the client screened positive on their co-occurring screener. And then if they did, were they then referred for further assessment for co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder services? Next is just the services that you plan to provide to the client during the client's course of treatment or recovery. It is okay if the client does not ultimately complete the services. This is just your intention of what services the client should receive, or what you plan for the client to receive while they're at your agency garnering services. You must select at least one modality right here in this section. You must also select at least one treatment of this section. But then for the following sections like medical services, education services, case management services, employment services, HIV and AIDS services, aftercare services, and recovery support services, there is no red triangle with an exclamation point. So these are not required to list any type of service specifically for SOAR grant clients, unless you plan on offering them. For living conditions, it will ask in the last 30 days, where has the client been living most of the time? If your client responds with housed, then you receive the pop-up for the exact type of housing unit the client reports mostly using in the last 30 days. If your client responds with two different types or feels like they've used evenly multiple types of housing in the last 30 days, you can click housed and then click other and then list out the response options, even if housed is not an option. This is not very common, but if you do run into this rare instance, this is an option on how to get that information properly recorded. It'll also ask if the client currently lives with any person over the past 30 days who has had regularly used alcohol or other substances. For Section D, employment, income, and education, the first question is, are you currently enrolled in a job or school or job training program? And if the client is enrolled, it will also ask if they are full-time or part-time. If your client is incarcerated, it will ask for you to just select not enrolled because job training programs or education programs within jails and prisons do not count for the GIPR collection. It'll also ask the client's highest level of education that they finished and whether or not they received a degree. Most clients that we see in Indiana respond with less than 12th grade or a 12th grade high school diploma. However, report whatever the client honestly provided to the interviewer. For the question, are you currently employed? You can clarify by focusing on the status during most of the previous week, determining whether the client worked at all or had a regular job but was off work. If the client's incarcerated and has no work outside of jail, just put not looking for work. If the client is incarcerated and has work outside of jail, you can put employed part-time. For this question, do you individually have enough money to pay for the following living expenses? Choose all that apply. Some respondents might get this question backwards, so just ensure that they understand the question. It is asking how much or how many of the following list they have enough money to pay for as regular living expenses, not for the things that they cannot pay for. And then it will ask for the client's personal annual income, meaning the total pre-tax income from all sources earned in the past year. The next section is legal. So the first question is, in the past 30 days, how many times have you been arrested? And if the client is currently incarcerated. If the client indicated no arrest in the past 30 days, but is incarcerated at the time of the interview, just mark currently incarcerated. It'll also ask the client if they are currently awaiting charges, trial, or sentencing, and if they are currently on parole or probation or intensive pretrial supervision. It'll then ask if they currently participate in a drug court program or if they are in a deferred prosecution agreement. Again, all of this is just self-reported information from the client. For Section F, mental and physical health problems and treatment recovery, it'll ask the client to rate their quality of life in the past 30 days. And then it'll also ask in the last 30 days, have they experienced any of the following symptoms? Similar to the substance use section, if you do input 00, the system may not accept that 00. It will not give you a pop-up if you input 00. So just ensure that you're double checking your input in this section. And review before moving on. And just note that this disclaimer here is that if a client reports one or more days to any question in number 2, so these above symptoms that we just responded to, just ensure that they're seen by a licensed professional as soon as possible. It'll also ask if the client is aware of or bothered by any of the psychological and emotional problems in the past 30 days. And then in the past 30 days, where they may have gone to receive medical care, and they can select multiple options. If the client responds that they do currently have medical or health insurance, then you'll receive the pop-up of what type of insurance they report having, and they can respond with multiple options. The final section is Section G for social connectedness. So in the past 30 days, did you attend any voluntary mutual support groups for recovery? If the client does not understand the question or needs some examples, you can say, in other words, did you participate in a non-professional peer-operated organization that assists individuals who have addiction-related problems? For instance, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Secular Organization for Sobriety, Women for Sobriety, religious, faith-affiliated recovery mutual support groups, or things of the like. Attendance does count if it was virtual as well. If they say yes, it'll ask for them to specify how many times. In the past 30 days, if they've had any interaction with family or friends that are supportive of their recovery, hopefully yes for clients. And it'll also ask how satisfied they were with their personal relationships. And the final question is, in the past 30 days, did you realize that you need to change these social connections or places that negatively impact your recovery? Now, when we look up at the top headers, it looks like there are no more red boxes indicating that all of the required questions have been responded to. And now on this last page, the submit button has changed from grayed out and unavailable to blue, where I can actually click on it to submit this form. The submit button will load, and then it will tell me at the bottom of the page whether or not the submission was successful or not. Again, if the form is successful right now, it still needs to upload into the SPARS system. So GIPRA has moved from our DEBS website to SAMHSA's federal reporting system called SPARS. Overnight or each night, any GIPRA inputted into DEBS will process into the SPARS system. And if there are any funky responses or responses that do not make sense for the GIPRA collection, then you'll receive an error message the next morning with the exact client ID, and you'll be asked to go back into the DEBS system, to go back to that client's dashboard, to go to their GIPRA view forms page, and then it will tell you more about that error and ask for you to edit the GIPRA and then resubmit it overall. Sometimes the error message can be vague, so if you ever have any difficulties with inputting the GIPRA or interpreting the error message for the GIPRA, please reach out to the SOAR team for help. Now we can see that the intake GIPRA is uploaded as the form status. Once it's fully approved into the SPARS system, that means it's totally finished. It will say approved here for form status. We also have this disclaimer above the uploaded GIPRA for GIPRA forms with error messages will be deleted if the issues aren't resolved with a corrected form within 60 days. So once you've received an error message for a GIPRA, you do have 2 months to resolve that issue before it will just be deleted from DEBS and you'd have to start over. One thing I did not mention earlier as well is that once you have your intake completed with your client, there is a timeline for the other GIPRAs as well. So for the GIPRAs, for the intake, it's the first day of services, and the general time frame is at least 2 successful service dates with the client, or the client has successfully been in treatment for at least 1 week or 2 weeks total. So if you have very transient population at your agency, so you might not have a client that's going to be seen for more than like an hour in one day, you can wait until they've had at least 2 successful or 3 successful contacts with services or 1 to 2 weeks of successful treatment before you decide to do the intake GIPRA with the client. And again, once you complete an intake with a client, you are on the hook to complete the follow-up with the client, regardless of whether or not they've been discharged. Now, for the discharge, this is at the time of discharge for the program, or if the client is done receiving SOAR grant funds and they've maxed out their units that they can be charged from the SOAR grant. You should contact them within 2 weeks of their discharge or at their last day of treatment, and you can do it anytime in that time span. The administrative discharge below is for any client that you cannot contact for the regular discharge interview, and it is a very shortened version of the discharge interview that just the clinician or just the therapist or service provider can fill out themselves. This is also if the client is unable to be reached or if the client does not want to participate in the discharge interview. For the 6-month follow-up, regardless of whether or not the client has been discharged from your program, you will have to contact them for a follow-up. The client is eligible for their 6-month follow-up 5 to 8 months after their intake. So you can't contact a client within, or if you can't contact a client within 5 months, 5 to 8 months after their intake has been completed, or if the client doesn't want to participate, you can do the administrative follow-up for this as well. Again, a very shortened version that just the service provider can complete on their own. And if the GIPRA follow-up interview is completed after 8 months, you can also still input this into the system, and it will just say for you to respond that GIPRA follow-up was completed outside of the time window. We will send you a reminder to your program contact when an individual is eligible for the 6-month interview, and it's also displayed on your organization's GIPRA queue on your dashboard page when you first log into DEBS. Overall, we do report this data to SAMHSA to track utilization and follow-up completion rates as a grant requirement. We're shooting for a high follow-up rate overall. Follow-up rates only count if you do the follow-up GIPRA, not the administrative follow-ups. If you ever want to talk about your follow-up process, how you contact clients, difficulties with contacting clients, and trying to increase your follow-up rate, please contact the SOAR team. We are more than happy to set that up with you. And that is how to add a new GIPRA into the DEBS system.